Alright, welcome to the video on the human microbiome. So, biome is a naturally occurring community of plants or animals occupying a particular habitat, such as a forest or a ocean. Micro means microscopic, and for the human microbiome, it's a collection of microorganisms residing within distinct communities on and in the human body. And we'll see that it's mostly bacteria. There are some that live on your skin. The most live in your intestines. They live all throughout your body. Some of its functions. The bacteria that live in the intestines are the ones we know the most about. We know they help to digest food. Things like fiber that humans can't digest, these bacteria that live in our intestines can break down. Unfortunately, they make gas as a byproduct of that, which is sometimes unpleasant. These bacteria can also help us with absorbing nutrients. They can prime the immune system. That means they're getting the immune system ready to fight similar bacteria. Some of these bacteria can also produce vitamins. They play a role in energy production. They guard us against disease, so if we have the good bacteria living in us, then there's no room for the bad bacteria to live. And they can also influence our mental health, and we're still learning more about this. The microbiome can be disrupted by several things, but the main one is antibiotics. Antibiotics are nice when there's a bacteria that's making you sick and you want to kill it, but a lot of times they kill the good bacteria too. One common side effect of antibiotics is it causes diarrhea. And some other diseases that could result are diabetes, heart disease, asthma, multiple sclerosis, obesity, which we'll talk more about later, inflammatory bowel disease, autism, and even cancer. So the Human Microbiome Project started in 2012. So in the early 2000s, we did the Human Genome Project to sequence the human genome. And then using the same techniques of PCR and DNA sequencing, they were able to study the human microbiome. It's hard to study this because these bacteria and things, they don't grow outside the human body, so it's hard to learn about them. But if we can sequence their DNA, then we can know what proteins they're going to make and have a good idea what they're going to do. So, what they discovered is this organized system of microbes within every healthy adult consists of over 100 trillion microorganisms. They are microorganisms, mostly bacteria, some viruses, some fungi, and some archaea. If you took all of them together, they would weigh about 3 pounds, but they're so small. Here's an example of some of the different communities. So that's different microorganisms in each of these different areas. So the gastrointestinal tract has the most. You can see there's differences between the nose and in the mouth, even between the teeth and the mouth, and on the skin, and they're different everywhere. Some people think the microbiome is the largest endocrine organ because members of the microbiota release hormones and chemicals that influence distal organs. So they're releasing hormones that are going to influence other organs that are farther away, and hormones that are secreted elsewhere influence the members of the microbiota. So some people say we should call this another organ. Functions of the microbe, again, they help with digesting food, absorbing nutrients, prime the immune system, produce vitamins, play a role in energy production, guard against disease, and influence mental health. The human microbiome has about 22,000 genes, which is a lot, but compared to the 8 million sorry, I said that backwards. The human microbiome has about 8 million genes compared to the 22,000 in the human genome. So most of the genes in your body are actually from the microbes, and the genes are the instructions for making a protein. Okay, the reason that the same treatment or the same diet will work in some people but not others. If you look at humans, if you look at your neighbor, you share 99.9% of your DNA is identical. Um, but if you look at the microbiome, no two individuals have the same microbiome, so not even identical twins. And the microbiome can affect the way we metabolize or break down certain drugs. So Tylenol causes problems in some people when some of their bacteria in their intestines convert it into something that is bad for your liver. Metformin is a diabetes drug, and it works in some people because it influences the bacteria that help your body to use insulin better. There's a soy diet that's supposed to protect you against cancer, but now we know it's because of the way it interacts with the bacteria in your intestine. And if you look at people's intestines, in the US and Western countries, only about 25% of the people have this certain bacteria. If you look at China, Japan, Korea, in those populations, it's more like 50 to 60% of the people have this bacteria. So it may or may not be helpful to you. Alright, the way we acquire a microbiome is just from bacteria all around us. It starts even before birth and during the birth process, going through the birth canal, through breastfeeding, through other people, furniture, skin, pets. There's bacteria all around us, and anytime you touch them or get one in you, you add to your microbiome. So it starts even before you're born, from the placenta. Passing through the birth canal, you pick up some bacteria. In breastfeeding, you pick up a lot. There is some bacteria on food that we pick up. And really, the first 3 years are the most critical. Between ages 2 and 5, your microbiome is pretty much developed. It's pretty much the same as in adults. And during adulthood, it can be altered by food, by the environment, or by antibiotics. And with old age, we tend to see decreased diversity, which is generally not a good thing. Decreased diversity is not good for your immune system, which may be why with old age you're more susceptible to diseases. Okay, there's a cool body at work that talks about, so they were doing this human genome project, and they had all kinds of people in it, and they had pregnant women in it. And so they're sampling the bacteria in their vagina, and they notice all of a sudden these bacteria appear that help with digesting milk. And they're like, why the heck would those be in the vagina? But then they realize pretty soon a baby's going to come through there, and he or she would pick up some of those bacteria and then incorporate it into that baby's microbiome. Also, breast milk has over 700 species of bacteria in it, so that helps to build the baby's microbiota. If you look at a baby's intestines, about 30% of the bacteria come from the breast milk, and another 10% come from the mother's skin. Okay, next is the bacterial link to obesity. So this has been shown pretty convincingly in mice that obese humans and mice have a different gut microbiota compared to lean individuals. The microbiota of obese people has an increased capacity to harvest energy from the diet, so that means if the lean person and the obese people, if they eat the same thing, the obese person is going to get more calories from it because they're better able to get the nutrients out of it. In experiments giving lean mice the microbiota from the obese mice cause an increased body fat in the lean mice. And this obesity may be linked to antibiotic use. We know in the livestock industry they'll give antibiotics to animals to keep them healthy, but also it makes them gain weight. And when you sell your animals by the pound, you want them to gain weight. You don't care if that weight is fat or muscle. Okay, we see that people with a greater microbial diversity have a much stronger immune system. People with a lower diversity of microbiomes those have a weaker immune system, and it's been linked to obesity, arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease, osteoporosis, psychiatric disorders, and cancer. So, some things we can do to help our microbiome: a high fiber plant based diet that's going to help feed them. I mentioned some of the ones in your intestines break down fiber for you. Foods rich in polyphenols. So, some foods that have polyphenols would be blackberries, um, dark chocolate, olive oil. So, those are all going to stimulate the growth of healthy bacteria. Taking probiotics. Probiotics are basically pills full of bacteria, and the idea is that you'll get those healthy bacteria in your intestines. The next thing is prebiotics, things like artichokes, leeks, onion, garlic, jicama, bananas, asparagus, and apples. These have a lot of fibers that are going to nourish the healthy bacteria in your gut. Next is fermented foods, things like yogurt, sauerkraut, and kefir. These all contain bacteria, and hopefully having those good bacteria growing in us will get rid of the disease-causing species. Exercise has been shown to boost the amount of good bacteria in your intestines. Being outdoors helps. Playing in the dirt, you're going to be exposed to more bacteria out there. And avoiding unnecessary antibiotics. That's kind of tricky because sometimes you need them, but if they're prescribed too much, they're going to hurt your good bacteria. So, things that are bad for the microbiome, we already mentioned antibiotics. A high fat, high sugar diet is bad for the microbiome because that's not feeding the good bacteria, that's feeding the bad bacteria. Stress is not good for it, so you should not have lived in 2020, although I'm not sure there's a good alternative. Smoking is bad for your microbiome. Air pollution is bad for the microbiome, although there's not a lot you can do to control that. A sedentary lifestyle, so being a couch potato, is bad for your microbiome. The overuse of sanitizing products, such as antibacterial soap or hand sanitizer, which we're all doing right now due to the COVID-19 virus. It's not good for your microbiome. Another threat to the microbiome is invasion by disease-causing bacteria. That's another one that we don't have a lot of control over. So let's next look at what's in the microbiome. So it's primarily bacteria, also some viruses, fungi, and archaea. So let's look at the structure of a bacteria. They're kind of similar to our cells, but they're a lot smaller. They don't have organelles. They do have DNA, but they don't have a nucleus. They do have ribosomes. They have a membrane that's similar to ours. In addition, they have a cell wall outside of that, and many of them have a capsule outside of that to keep them from drying out. Many of them have these little extensions called pili that lets them attach to each other or to other things, and it's also a way they can transfer genetic material between each other. Many of them have plasmids, like you see that green thing there is a plasmid, and that probably came from another bacteria. And those can contain things like antibiotic resistance genes. They can contain a lot of things. We actually genetically engineer bacteria to do a lot of things for us as scientists. So that's the structure of a bacteria. And the bacterial structure that allows bacteria to develop drug resistance is a plasmid. I mentioned those can be transferred from one bacteria to another. Okay, next question is about Clostridium difficile. So, a very bad disease, kills a lot of people, and we really can't treat it. Until recently, we've tried fecal microbiota transplantation, or FMT. which is really the fancy name for a poop transplant. So there's lots of bacteria living in your intestines, and they divide pretty rapidly. So there's lots of bacteria in your poop or feces. So they can take the feces from a healthy person and transplant it into the person with this disease. Um, Usually it's done um, through an enema. And then the good bacteria, they multiply, and then they kind of crowd out the bad bacteria, and it's kind of an amazing treatment, and it's also very cheap because um, people generally don't charge a lot for feces. Okay, next is the structure of virus. So this is a coronavirus right here. Viruses are even smaller than bacteria. They don't have any organelles. Basically, what they are is a nucleic acid, either DNA or RNA, and they're surrounded by some proteins. Um, so this has some capsomere proteins and then an envelope, and then this one has some spikes on it, and those spikes are what help it attach to other cells. Um, so with coronavirus, a lot of the vaccines or the treatments are looking at a way to find something that can bind to these spike proteins and stop them. So they're not living. So to reproduce, what a virus has to do, here's some shapes. So different shapes of viruses, they can be helical or polyhedral or complex like this, looks sort of like a spider. Let's look at viral replication. So there's a debate about whether or not a virus is alive. They can't multiply on their own. They need a host cell to be able to multiply. They don't have their own ribosomes, so basically they invade a host cell, bind to that cell surface. That's the first step. Then in the next step, they're going to penetrate that cell, and then once inside, they release their DNA into that cell. Then the virus uses that cell's ribosomes to make viral proteins, and then the virus proteins are packaged into a virus, and then they're going to be released from that cell, and it usually destroys that cell in the process. And a single cell can produce 10,000 to 50,000 new viruses in as little as 48 hours. So that is